Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the third part of our lecture. We are talking about gender typing, and then we're going to talk about family influences. We know a lot about gender already. It develops quite a bit in early childhood. We know that you have a very strong gender identity by the time you're 3. You're also able to categorize things by gender. At that point in time, you have a clear indication of what girl and boy toys are, clothes are, occupations as well. So let's take a look at how it continues to develop from mid childhood. We know that by age 11, children would attribute certain personality traits to gender at this point in time. They see masculine as aggressive and rational and tough, where feminine are more gentle, sympathetic, and dependent. We also see this showing up in schools with teachers describing girls that demonstrate these traits, what we categorize as feminine traits, as more compliant. They also describe boys who demonstrate more masculine traits as lazy and trouble. We see differences amongst achievement as well and how we think about achievement. So, beginning in middle school, children start assigning subjects that belong to each gender. Girls are viewed as being good at reading and art and spelling and music and math, and boys are good at math and sports and science and mathematical abilities, or mechanical abilities, I should say, excuse me. And you can see how these pieces would play out for occupations as well and how they would transfer. If you're good at math, you're more likely to be an engineer. So you can see how our stereotypes very early have an impact on our outcomes. We do see some change happening in this area, however. Some research was done between 1960 and 1970 where they asked children to draw a scientist. At that point in time, only 1% drew a female scientist. The most recent research done from 1985 to 2016 asked the same question, and 28% of the population drew a female scientist. Now, overwhelmingly, they were girls that drew female scientists, but we do see an increase and we're headed in a different direction, which is great to see. Moving on to gender flexibility. Gender flexibility is the ability to view personality traits and activities as flexible or the potential to belong to each gender. Here are the facts around gender flexibility. We know that children in this age range are more likely to be flexible with personality traits. So they're not as black and white in their thinking as you would see in early childhood. They are still more likely to describe sexes in stereotypical descriptions. So we're still in that mind frame, even though we can be flexible. Typically, when we describe girls, we're talking more about the physical appearance, whereas when we talk about boys, we're more likely to talk about their abilities, activity, and personality traits. They have a strong belief at this point in time, or a stronger belief, I should say, that you can exclude somebody from your peer group because of the sex that they are. Girls are more likely to describe themselves as having other gender characteristics, so there's more flexibility in their thinking. It seems more acceptable. And at this point in time, they already have an understanding that masculine professions, or what is stereotypical masculine professions, are more favorable to be engaged in. There might be some stereotype there, but we also know that typical masculine professions are making more money. All right, when we think about how gender identity works, we can think about whether or not somebody feels comfortable being around their own gender, and that's gender typicality, or gender contentedness would be the idea of how comfortable do I feel with the sex I've been assigned? Do I feel like there's some cohesiveness there? So those can result in two different things. For gender typicality, you can have gender typical or gender atypical. And you have high agreement or low agreement. For gender contentedness, you can have, again, high agreement or low agreement. So if you have high agreement, then you are very content with what you have been assigned at birth and how you identify. If you have very low agreement, then that means you're very discontented and you don't have agreement between what you've been assigned and how you identify. Now, with both of these things, there's going to be a lot of pressure to conform, which can lead to internalizing behaviors such as withdrawal, anxiety, sadness, disappointment. We also look at both of these things when you have low agreement, when you have gender atypicality, and you have gender discontented, you are going to have a decline in self-worth because you don't really quite know where you fit or if you fit at all. So just something to be mindful of, especially if you're going into the teaching profession, making sure all of our students are supported. Just an example here, we can play a quick game. If I were to ask you gender stereotypical wise, if we put on our stereotypical hat, what you thought number 1 was, number 9 would be the astronaut. If you could find the NASCAR driver, what number would you pick out? And it's number 4. Probably, maybe not. If you had your gender stereotypical hat on, you probably wouldn't have picked her. If you're thinking about gender stereotypes, who would be the chef? Yeah, right there, right? What about president? Here. What about golfer? That one, number 7. What about an actor? Number 8. Meteorologist? Number 3. Author and poet? Number 2. And the last one we have, a cancer researcher. So just really thinking about why you have been maybe more aware as you were working through this little game of gender stereotypes and less likely to lean into those, right? Because we understand them, we don't want to have them, we know them to be negative. The reality is that they exist in our mind and we're aware of them. We were able to put on our gender stereotype hat and think through what somebody might believe if they thought those thoughts. All right, let's talk about family influences before I let you go from this part of the lecture. The first part I want to point out is that when we think about parenting in mid-childhood, it actually can be a lot easier than the other age groups. And there's reasons for this. It's really only easier if you're able to provide your children with rationale for why they should behave a certain way. You're going to really engage in this authoritative parenting style where there's a high level of support and a high level of demand. Children are also, if you offer them opportunities to participate in decision making and make joint decisions, it becomes a lot easier because they take on some of that responsibility. They have more agency in what's happening. And we're also at this point in time seeing a shift in control from parents to children when appropriate. I know for myself, I have a child at home that is 11 years old, and I was able to call the other day when I was running late and ask him to start dinner. He did have an adult there to help him supervise, but just that ability to give them a little bit of agency, and he was very excited to do it. Also shifting that control when possible. All right, we think about family influences and whether or not it's better to have siblings versus being an only child. Well, the results are mixed because we know that sibling rivalry escalates during this time period. It's more significant too if you are the same sex siblings. It can also shift though depending on your relationship to be a positive thing. It might be companionship, assistance, and emotional support. So if something happens that causes turmoil, such as a divorce, a sibling can be a very positive thing if you have a positive relationship. So it can be either or. But we also see with only children that they tend to have higher academic achievement, they have higher motivation, higher self-esteem, but because maybe lack of social interactions early on, they're tipped to be less accepted in their peer groups, and they have closer relationships to parents. Obviously, because they were the only one, right? So we can see the differences here, not one better than the other, but differences in what they have to gain or what they demonstrate once they have experienced those outcomes. Now, when we think about family styles, we can look at lesbian and gay families, and we understand that they do not differ in peer relations, sexual orientation, or mental or gender role behavior. Children who are raised in those families, no differences. Actually, the evidence kind of tends to point to them being better adjusted. And this is because they have these larger families that are families of choice, because occasionally they might have grandparents who are not very accepting of their parents' lifestyle. And then those parents go out and make their own family. So they have this wealth of support around them. Children who come from families that are never married, you see the steady increase of children being born out of wedlock right now. It's really more common for younger adults with lower income and lower education to have children out of wedlock. Cohabitation can be beneficial if the father is providing financial support, emotional support, or helping with parenting, but it's not always beneficial to cohabitate with someone if they're not being supportive. And you could see how that would impact development if you have someone that is relying on you but not helping you. All right, thinking about divorce, the immediate effects is that typically the mother that is the head of the household may experience a drop in income, right? Now they're a single parent, they have to continue to provide, there's not as much income coming in. These are generalizations that tend to be true. There's also additional stress and depression for the mother as they go through an adjustment period. And most often, father-child relationships can decrease. So we see less fathers being around, being supportive. Again, not the rule, but common to happen, things that we see often happen. We also see long-term effects. Those long-term effects typically improve about 2 years after divorce, after the adjustment period has happened. But we do see some carryover on lower academic achievement, social skills, and emotional well-being. Those things are all impacted. They're all impacted differently depending on these factors. So age, sex, temperament, and parenting are all going to be really impactful when we look at why and how they might be influence. When we look at younger children, for example, they are more likely to have self-blame or think it's their fault that their parents are getting divorced. When you have older children, they're more likely to act out and show maladjusted behaviors in school. Sex is a little bit different as well. Typically, girls take on more self-blame and they internalize the issues. Boys tend to have more outward behaviors. Temperament is also different. When we think back to our temperament and we have those easygoing children, they're going to be better adjusted coming out of a divorce initially versus children that tend to be more difficult. And parenting style is a huge contributor. If you have parents who are authoritative, who keep the issues that cause the divorce away from the children and they keep it separate, then children are way more likely to come out with less issues or less maladjustment from it. Okay? And with that, we have one more section left, problems of development. I will see you there.